Hello and welcome back. I'm going to wrap this class series up and probably actually wrap up Payathon for a little while. It's not going to be the end of Payathon, so don't freak out. There'll be more Python videos to come, but just to mix it up a bit, I'll be switching over to doing some tech anim videos. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But just to wrap up this whole class series, I thought it'd be good to actually go through a more realistic a more realistic example, of when you would want to use a class. So in this case, I'm going to use a class in a UI, and I'm going to create a little suffix renamer UI. I'm not going to actually implement the suffix rename portion. That shouldn't be that difficult actually. And if you don't know how to implement UI elements, you should check out the UI series. But I just want to show how you can wrap UIs inside of a base class. So let's begin. I'll be doing this in PyCharm. So if you guys don't know how to use PyCharm, I also have another video on how to switch over to PyCharm, how to set up PyCharm and get your scripts working from within PyCharm inside of Maya itself. So the first thing I want to do is go new Python package. And here I want to just call this, let's call it UI as a start. And maybe in here, I'm going to create a new script and call this suffixer. Okay, just like that. And because I've already set up my environment, I should be able to import the suffixer straight away. So I can do something like import suffixer. I want to do from UI import suffixer because we're importing from the UI package the suffixer script. So if I run that, you can see it works. Nothing happens, of course, because there's nothing in here. If I put print hello world, just to show you guys that it's all working, I need to reload my suffixer script so that it updates. And let's try this again. Reload suffixer, and let's from UI import suffixer. You can see it says hello world there. So yeah, I guess once it reloads, it re-imports the script and does hello world. So yeah, that's all working. So the first thing we want to do is actually, let's create our class. Let's import pymel.core. We're going to use pymel for this as PM. And let's create our base UI class. And in here, we just inherit from the lowest level object, which is just object. So if you guys don't know what's going on, make sure you check the previous video where I go over class inheritance. And here I want to create a class attribute. So this class attribute is almost like a global attribute that can be accessed from this base UI class. So we'll use that a little bit later on. The first thing I want to do is just initialize this base class. Probably want our UI to have some sort of name, and then let's store that name in an attribute which we can access later. And I know we're going to create some sort of window. So we'll just have a window attribute. For now, we don't have any window since this is our base UI. Similar to how we use the inheritance in the inheritance video, we use an attribute as a placeholder for now, and we later on override this none with the actual window when it's created. And we probably do that within the subclass, so not this base class. The subclass will actually create the window and will overwrite this base class attribute. Okay, so then let's just add this particular object to the list of active windows or UIs. So we can append it to this list. So we're going to append self. So we're adding this object once it's created, once it's initialized, we add this object to this active class attribute. Okay, so we're adding itself to this list. And as we run and as we implement more UIs and run this code over and over again, it will just add to this list more and more of this of different UIs. And we're going to use this list later on to search for existing UIs and delete them. For example, if I rerun the UI script to relaunch a UI, what I want to happen is I actually want to if there's any existing UIs, I want to just delete that UI and relaunch it again. I don't want to have just multiple copies of the UI over and over again each time I run it. So that's the whole reason for this base UI class, is to look for existing UIs and then delete it whenever it finds it. Okay, so I think that's about it for the initialization. So how do we actually close the UI? Well, we can do a method called close active. And then we want to look for UIs inside of the active UIs. So I can say for I in self.active, so we're looping over all these active UIs. And then we say if I.name, so we're looking at the UIs in there, these objects in there. We're looking for the name of the object in there. And if the name of the object matches the name of the current object that's being created, then we can say, well, let's delete it. But in fact, we also want to make sure that the object actually has a window created. So if there's no window actually there, then I guess there's not much point in actually, in actually going through this whole process. So let's just make sure that this object also has a window. And then what I'm going to do after that is UI.window, window.exists. So what this command does, Python command, is that it looks for this window class inside of this pm.ui package, this pm.ui module. And then it's got this built-in class method called exists. So you can use this to check if a UI actually exists within Maya. So first of all, we check if the UI exists in this active list, the object, the Python object itself, and then we check if the actual Maya UI exists. Now they're different things. So in Python, we have a copy of the class of the object, and in Maya, we have the actual UI. So we want to make sure that they both exist first before we delete it. And to do that, we just have to check I.window. Okay, so we're checking that this window, if there is a window that we override earlier on, then we add this to there. And then in here, we look for this object, and then we access that window again, and then we check if that window exists. So if it exists, then let's delete it. Okay, so we can do I.window.delete. So that window is now deleted. And then we can also just remove the copy of the object, the Python object, from this list. So let's remove I. Okay, so now that we've deleted the window, we no longer need it in active because it's not active anymore. So we remove it from that active list. Alrighty. Why is it giving me this little red dot? Let's see what it says. Indent does not match any alter indentation level. So maybe I did a mistake with the indentation. Just hit enter. It should be working. Yeah, I'm not sure why this is giving me an error, but could be a mistake. Let's see. It's this little guy here. There we go. Just delete that space there and that error goes away. That's why it's handy to use PyCharm. So you can catch those little errors like that. Because it gives you a hint. It's saying, something's wrong. And chances are something is wrong. The software tends to not lie. All right. So now we need a method of running the UI. So we've figured out how to delete existing UIs if there are any. And now how do we actually run this thing? Well, we can create a run method like this. And then the first thing we want to do before we run the UI is actually close any existing UIs. And then we can have another method called show. So this run is literally just to make sure that we close any active UIs before we show the new UI. So this would be the command that we run if we want to, run this UI. Okay. So next thing, we know we need some UI elements, but I don't want to add the UI elements to this actual base class. I want to do that in the subclass, because this base class is meant to be just a generic class with some sort of basic functionality, such as, searching for existing UIs and being able to run the UI, ensuring that we, check for existing active windows first. So here I'm just going to raise not implemented error. And what does this mean? Well, if someone tries to run this base class on its own and tries to run this method, then it's going to raise an error. So what this tells other developers, or yourself, if you look at the code later on, is that, okay, we have a way to run the UI, but we need to actually add some sort of UI elements before we can utilize this class correctly. So I'm going to do the same thing with this show method here that we wrote up there. I'm just going to raise not implemented error. So if someone tries to show a UI here, it's not going to work because we haven't created any windows. So that's what's going on there. But we want to actually create a window, because what's the point of this? So that's what I'm going to do in this suffix UI. So this is going to inherit from base UI, like so. And then, of course, we always want to initialize this class first. Make sure we put the name there. And then we want to use our handy dandy super method, our super function actually. And then run the init on that. And of course, we need to pass the name to there so that we have access to the name up there. So let's just say name is equal to name, and then we're good to go. So that's all we really need to do at the moment. And you can see if I mouse over this, it says must implement all abstract methods. And this is just PyCharm telling me that, hey, we have some methods here that we haven't implemented. So that's why it's really helpful to add these not implemented methods here, just to show other developers that, okay, down here in this base class, we actually need to add some sort of implementation for these methods. Otherwise, this class isn't going to be much use. So let's do that. So first of all, I'm just going to write the show command, okay, this show function. And we want to create a window. So we're going to override this self.window attribute up there with an actual window now. So we can do pm.window, and then let's give the window some sort of name. So self.name, because we're already defining the name when we run this, when we execute this class, we want to just pass the name down there. And in fact, I want to add some sort of default name here so that we don't always have to remember to add a name when we create a new class. Okay, so let's save this code. And last thing I want to do is just do self.window.show, because we create this window. Now we want to show this window so we can actually see it inside of Maya. So this is enough for us to actually start to run this code. And just so I don't get a huge window, I'm just going to add some width and height attributes here. And let's just make it not sizable. Sizable is equal to false. Okay, so we can't resize this. Just make some nice new lines there. And let's try it. So let's do suffix UI. And remember here, we normally need to add some sort of name to the UI. But since we have some default name here, we don't actually need to do that. And I want to store this UI in a little variable there like that. So we can run this. You can see nothing happens. And that's because we need to actually run this run command, which will close any active versions of this suffix UI. And then it'll show the UI. So once we run the show command, it'll look for this and it'll execute this code. It's not going to execute this code here because we're running it from this suffix UI class. So it's going to look for this version of show. So we've effectively overridden this base class's show method. So this is more powerful than this because we're running it from the suffix UI. So this is just a way to show other developers that we need to have this show method there. And realistically, we need to implement the UI elements method there as well, but I'm not going to do that just yet. Just want to show you guys that when I do run now, let's run all this code. You see we get this suffixer UI, and I've already implemented some buttons from early on, and that's why you're seeing it there. So what I actually need to do is just reload suffixer so that we get nice and fresh, so you guys aren't confused. So if I run this, you can see we just get an empty UI with the width and height, and it's not resizable. So that's pretty much what we want. So now let's actually implement the UI elements. So how do we do that? Well, I'm just going to come here and I'm going to create a UI elements method over here. So this will override this one. And now what I want to do is add some UI elements. So we can, first of all, let's add a widgets attribute. Okay, so we can do self.widgets. So we have a way to store all our widgets, and it's not necessary, but it's just a nice way to, manage all your UI elements. So here I can do something like widgets, and I can create a new, because this is a dictionary, I can just create a new entry in the dictionary. Maybe I'll call this main layout. And then I just want to use pm.row layout. Just create a generic row layout. And then I want to have a text field of some sort. So I'm going to call this suffixer tf for suffixer text field. And then let's just create a text field right there. And then finally, I want to do widgets, and I want to create a button. So suffixer underscore btn. And let's just add a button there like that. And for the row layout, we just want to make sure we say number of columns is equal to 2. So we have 2 columns in the row layout. So down here, before we show the UI, we create the UI here first. Let's just run UI elements. So what's going to happen now is it's going to create the window, run UI elements, so it'll create the row layout, it'll create the text field, it'll create the button, and then finally it will show the window. So if everything goes according to plan, it should all just work. So let's just do a quick reload, suffixer, run that. So refresh the script. Now I can rerun all this code, and yeah, there you see, we've got our little text field, we have a little button there. And it just says button 38, which isn't that nice. So what we can actually do is give the button a label and just say maybe add suffix. Okay, so we can reload this now and then run this, and we have this little UI. And every time we run this, you can see it deletes the existing one and it creates a new one. So what actually happens when we do the run is it'll go to run, it'll look for any active windows. And if you remember, anytime we instantiate this base class, so we instantiate the base class here when we run super. So when we create this class, it runs super, then it goes to here and runs all this code. At the very end, we add this object, this base UI object, this current window that it's creating, we add it to the list of active UIs. And then when we run close active, it looks for all the active UIs, it loops through all of them, it looks for the name of the active UI, and it looks for the name of the current UI that we're creating. And if they are equal to each other, then this is true, then we continue. And then we also check if it has an existing window. So this code doesn't need to run if the window doesn't actually exist yet. But if it does exist, that means there must be a copy of this UI somewhere stored in there. So we just want to check if that also exists inside of Maya. And if it does, then we delete the UI and we remove the copy of the old UI from the active list. And then finally, let's see what happens finally. We show the UI. So it creates a new window, then we create a UI elements, and then we show the window inside of Maya. So that's pretty much it. That's the entire, that's the entire flow, if you would call it, of the order of operations when you run this code. And, it kind of ties together all the things that we talked about with classes, such as, we have inheritance here, we have class attributes, we have methods here, and it kind of shows you how you can create some sort of base class UI with some sort of basic functionality that we can reuse anytime we have a new UI. So for example, if I wanted to create like a prefix UI, and I want the prefix UI to not be tied to the suffix UI, we can do the exact same thing and implement the prefix UI inheriting from base UI. So anytime we launch the prefix UI, it'll delete any existing prefix UIs. And yeah, just a nice little way to inherit functionality in something that's a little bit more practical like UIs. And I think UIs are a good example of why you want to use a class, because there's a lot of data that you want to store along with the UI, such as the name of the UI, the window of the UI. You want to store some widgets that you might be able to reuse later on to do certain things. I'm not going to go through the entire implementation process of how to actually rename stuff. I think, hopefully by this point you guys will be able to figure it out. But yeah, this is kind of UIs and classes in a nutshell. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the series up till now, and hopefully in the future I can release more interesting videos on Python. But for now, thank you guys for sticking around, and yeah, hopefully see you guys in the TechViz Tech Anim series. Until next time.